Okay. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the podcast. I am really excited to have an avid reader I just learned about, Katie Abbott, who is general counsel of Puppet, here with me today. Katie, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
So, Katie, we just walked around a little bit, and I don't think we mentioned it, but I saw the library that you guys have here. I'm learning that you're an avid reader, and I want to get into sort of all of that. But for those that may not know about you or may not know about Puppet, walk us through who you are, how you came to be general counsel here at Puppet, and we'll start the journey there.
All right. Yeah. Well, I am an attorney that I started my career in New York City, actually working in finance as opposed to in tech, and had a great time there. And after about 5 years in New York working for a big law firm there, I decided I wanted to come back to the Northwest and really just was trying to decide between Portland or Seattle to try and find a job, because I quit my job in New York without anything lined up, which felt, as a lawyer, really risky. I'm very risk averse for that, but went and traveled around South America for a few months before coming to Portland. And I decided on Portland just with some family and friends who lived around here, and spent a little while networking to look for a job. And that's where I ended up at a job at a small boutique law firm that really focused on technology and working with tech clients and the various needs that tech clients had. And Puppet became one of my clients there. And so worked with Puppet as outside counsel for a few years before joining as Puppet's first and only attorney in 2014.
Wow.
I'll be honest, I was terrified.
Yeah. So they poached you.
They did, yes. But it was a mutually agreeable coaching.
Yeah.
And it was an exciting and, like I said, terrifying time coming in. I had always worked at a law firm before where I had support and people I could just walk down the hall and say, hey, what do you think of this? Yeah. Whereas here it was people coming to me saying, you're a lawyer. There's this looks like legal mumbo jumbo. You handle it. And I would just have to figure it out. And I got some great advice from an uncle who is an attorney. And he said, really, once you go in-house, you're starting to figure out how to be the quarterback, and you don't need to know everything yourself, but you do need to know, what you don't know, and where to reach out to. Yeah. And once he framed it up that way to me, I felt more confident coming into Puppet and just figuring it out as we went along. And 7.5 years later, still here.
Yeah. So are you from the Northwest?
I grew up, in Mount Vernon, Washington. So an hour north of Seattle.
Okay. And so how did you get to the East Coast? Did you go to school at the East Coast to start out? What's that? And then you went to South America. So we'll get into that too. But what took you to the East Coast?
Yeah, it was school. Okay. I did my undergraduate degree at Gonzaga University in Spokane, and then took about 4 years off between undergrad and law school, trying to figure out what I wanted to be when I grew up.
Yeah.
And it was at one point when I was working at a small independent bookstore, I bought a book on the LSAT and decided to study, took it on a whim and did well, and just thought, I'll give this a try. So sent off my applications for law school. And the next day, I actually took off and spent about 8 months traveling around the world while waiting to hear from law schools on whether or not I was accepted. And then once I found out I was accepted to Georgetown in Washington, D.C., that's where I decided I really wanted to go. So that's what brought me to the East Coast.
So you just got a book on the LSAT. You just decided, I'll just take the LSAT, did well, and then you wind up at Georgetown.
Yes.
Wow. It's all those reading when you were working at the bookstore.
Yeah, it probably helped.
So you traveled the world for 8 months.
Yes.
On backpack, like what and why?
I was so lucky when I graduated from high school. My parents had time. My dad had a sabbatical and my mom was a teacher. And so she had the summers off. And so when I was 17 and my siblings were 15 and 13, my parents had 6 weeks where they took us to Europe and we backpacked around as a family. And that was the first time any of us had been to Europe. We'd been to Canada growing up so close to the border, but that was the first, lengthy trip abroad. And we just got ignited with this love of travel. And so then when I studied at Gonzaga, again, very lucky that they had a program where you could do a year abroad your junior year in Florence, Italy, and was able to do that. And again, it just cemented that love of new experiences, meeting new people, getting to know the world outside of the one in which I grew up.
Yeah.
And so when I was looking at doing grad school, I just thought to myself, well, I am never going to have a chance to do this type of trip again.
Right. Yeah.
And so why not just go ahead and do it? So I was scrimped and saved. And luckily I was living at home with my parents at the time.
Yeah.
So I was able to not have to pay rent. And then, just bought a one-way ticket down to Sydney, Australia with a stopover in New Zealand. And then from there, just figured it out for the next 7.5 months.
Wow. And then so you come back, you end up going to Georgetown.
Yes.
You're there for 3 years. Did you, I would imagine you sort of interned while you were there. Maybe the 2L probably did an internship. And then what happened after you graduated? You went to New York City? That's what took you up there? Okay.
Yeah, I went and worked at a law firm in New York City. And when you go to work for those mid or big law firms in New York, you generally don't get to choose what group you're put in. But the thing is, I didn't have any preconceived notions because I had never worked for a law firm before, because I did internships in different areas as opposed to at a big law firm. And so they assigned me to the structured finance group. It ended up being an incredible experience.
Yeah,
I didn't have a finance background, but I worked with a partner who was such a good mentor. And I just remember at times when the first time he sat down with me after I had marked up a credit agreement or other documents, and he's like, okay, walk me through what you did and why. And then being able to have him coach me through, well, what about this? Did you notice this? And that was just such an incredible learning experience that I realized a lot of people don't get that.
Right.
I was terrified again. There's that word terror. When I sat down, I'm like, oh no, somebody's going to discover I don't know what I'm doing. Yeah. And of course I didn't know everything. I was a first year, second year associate. Yeah. And of course I didn't know. That's the point, is that I was learning then, and he took the time to teach me. Yeah.
So when you were there, how long were you there?
5 years.
Okay. So then after 5 years, was it sort of like, okay, I'm sort of done. I'm going back to the Northwest. I mean, what was the impetus? What catalyzed you to move back sort of home, if you will?
Yeah, I knew I always wanted to come back to the Northwest at one point or another. But when I got the job offer in New York as I was graduating from law school, figured I might as well give this a try because I'm very unlikely to move back to New York once I moved to the West Coast. Yeah. And so, I had a great time. I was able to, so many of my friends from law school moved up to New York as well. So I had this built-in social system moving to Manhattan at the same time. So it's like the ideal experience for Manhattan. And that was just such an incredible experience. And it was an interesting time. I was there from 2005 to 2010. So it was as the financial markets were crashing. And really, when I quit my job in 2010, things were picking back up in New York, but they weren't as much outside of New York. And so it was a little bit risky to just go ahead and quit, but it was something that I knew I wanted to come back. And I knew I wanted to take some time off in between. And I figured I would just see what happened and just figure it out. Yeah. So
I think that's a theme running through your whole life. Yeah. Just figure it out. Right. I mean, so you come back to the Northwest and you start working maybe you took a little bit of time off and then you started working for another law firm locally.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And they focused purely on tech representation, if you will?
Yeah, it was a small law firm, which it has since disbanded, but it was a really great place to work to get to learn. The attorneys, the two partners there, were such smart attorneys, or are such smart attorneys. And I learned a lot from them, just getting into a whole new area of law that I had not experienced before. And it was fun. It was exciting. I remember when I got here and they said, oh yeah, we actually prefer if you wear jeans to work because it's just more human and more accessible. Yeah. And being able to take all of my suits down to Dress for Success and say, I am not going to wear these anymore. Wow. Somebody else can use them.
Yeah. Yeah. Imagine you're just used to that and being in New York. It's just, when you talk about that, it just reminded me of that show called Suits.
Let me make sure I understand this, okay? We negotiated a deal that gave you everything you wanted. Mr. Cooper signed it. And now you won't close until we take away the last shred of his dignity?
Bingo.
I'm not sure if you ever saw it, but man, we watched that often. It was just, New York City just has so much energy too. The energy in New York is just palpable.
It is. Yeah.
So you came back here. And so now we think about sort of Puppet. So how did that transition happen? You were at Alto is the name of the law firm,
Yes.
right? For a while. So how long were you there? And then they just knocked on your door and said, hey, you want to come in-house?
Yeah, I was there. So I started in, I guess it was about 2011. And in 2013, Luke Knies, who was the founder of Puppet and at that point was still the CEO of Puppet, had reached out to me, just inviting me out for coffee. And so he and I met and he said, well, my sales team really likes working with you. Have you ever thought about going in-house? And at that point, I was very excited and also a little trepidatious at the idea because I had to me, it felt like I had not been working in tech for very long.
Yeah.
So we had a really good conversation and just said, you know what, right now isn't necessarily the right time for me. And Puppet was doing its search for its very first CFO at that time.
Yeah.
And the CFO is going to have a pretty strong opinion about who comes in-house
Right.
to work as a lawyer.
Right.
So not quite the right time for Puppet then. But what Luke asked me was just, if you ever think of leaving your law firm, I can't promise I'll have something. Just love to have you reach out so we can talk in case there is something.
Yeah.
And so about a year later, I was at that point where I was feeling a little antsy and ready to do something a little bit different and was being recruited to go in-house at another company. And so I thought, well, I'll just reach out and see what happens.
Yeah.
And one thing led to another and started at Puppet a few months later.
Wow. And you've been here for about 7.5, almost 8 years, right?
Yeah, 7.5. It'll be 8 in October this year.
So I remember I moved back to Portland in 2013. And at that point, like the tech scene in Portland was continuing to like grow. And Puppet obviously was one of those. And then, the relocation from a smaller space in the Pearl to where you are now in terms of, headquarters space, Puppet has gone through a tremendous growth spurt in that period since you've been here. It's because of you.
Clearly, I've got the magic touch. Yeah, it's been really amazing. When I first started working with Puppet as outside counsel in 2011, I think there were about 45 employees. And just seeing the growth and the change in the company and the trajectory has been incredible since then. We're about 500-ish at this point, and we are so much more global now. It was started as very much a Portland firm, and really we maintain our headquarters here because it's very central to who we are and part of our identity.
Yeah.
And what's been neat is that we can be expansive with that identity and really lean into all these different places where we've hired folks, both prior to the pandemic and then also during the pandemic, with it being I would say, more open and more focused on that ongoing hybrid remote that we plan on doing. And that was something that our CEO announced really early on, actually, in May 2020, as we were doing different all-company meetings. And she shared with the company that, we don't know when we're going to go back in the offices, but when we do, we fully intend to be permanently hybrid remote and really let it be the employee's choice where they work and when they come into the office, unless there's a specific business need that pulls them in.
Yeah. So it was an employee choice, not sort of manager choice. Or that's interesting because there's so much conversation that we've sort of seen and had, and you read out there, it's just, sort of manager approach. And then, but there's few I've seen that have sort of employee approach. And I think that's, it's incredible to sort of see what that will be like, as we get out of this. Of course, here in Oregon, we're going to be lifting our masks, coming up in the next week, which is actually the 2-year anniversary of when we had to be, if you think about that, right? It's March 12th, March 13th. So, what have you guys, so the leadership team, so, as general counsel, you're on the leadership team here at Puppet. And what are some of the things that you guys did and have done over the course of the last 2 years that sort of kept your teams together? We talked about communication has been such a big thing. The hybrid remote has been such a big component. It sounds like you guys have grown during that time. So what are some of the things that the leadership team did from a communication perspective to let the team know what the plan's going to be? Or are you still in the middle of that?
I think we will always be iterating on it, but we have put a lot of work into it, and we're trying to be very intentional in how we approach it and how we support our managers and our teams through our continued evolution as a company. I would say that the pandemic gave us a good learning opportunity, each of us who were accustomed to going into an office, to help us really understand what it was like for the team members who were distributed prior to that. Because all of a sudden we all were.
Right.
And now it meant that we could understand a little bit more of what that Zoom experience was for those employees and how it might feel for them versus, 4 of us sitting in a conference room and 1 person on the screen. And so one of the things that we've done is that we have a team who is that's cross-functional in nature, has really worked hard on developing hybrid remote guidelines and helping set out how can managers and teams develop their team norms, and then giving a lot of guidelines around, if you've got 3 people in the office and 2 people remote and you're going to have a team meeting, maybe it's, 1 head per screen. So we're all perhaps in different conference rooms or sitting at our desk, or if we are in the same conference room using 1 audio channel, but each of us are just on our laptop, as opposed to a picture with 3 people on it pretty far away down the conference room table, and then 2 people just on screen as you would normally see in Zoom. So trying to make it an equitable experience for people so that it doesn't matter if you're in the office or not, that we want the experience to be as similar and as inclusive as possible for everyone.
What's been the feedback thus far?
So far, so good. I think probably one of the most popular changes we've made is really shifting some of the perks away from being office focused and being more entire team focused. And I have to give our workplace team a huge shout out for finding this and really implementing it. Is rather than having just budget go towards snacks in the office, what we do is we now have a quarterly budget for each person to order some snacks from an online company where you can just go on and pick anything. And it's the same company that we use worldwide. And so everybody, it's all catered to local, what's available locally. It has been so positively received, including by myself. I get so excited when I get to pick out some of those snacks.
It's a good, that pivot I think has been big too. Like, what do you, from an equity and inclusion perspective, what do you provide people at their home office or at the third place, right? And then what does that sort of look and feel like? And to be able to then do that across the globe, across the entire sort of employee footprint, I mean, kudos to you guys for working through that. And logistically, it's challenging too. Yeah,
there are some logistics, and it's amazing the companies that have popped up during the pandemic that can help with that too. I think just to give another shout out to our people team and the work that they've done around that inclusive and equitable experiences. A lot of the places where we have offices have gyms in the building, and that's always been a nice thing for those who really like to have access to that. What they've shifted to is really saying, okay, everybody gets a monthly stipend for a certain amount, and you can use it towards wellness. And what does wellness mean to you? It could mean buying, a business book, a novel. It could mean going towards a gym membership. It could mean going towards a Peloton monthly membership. And so you can use it towards any of those things. And so that's also been a really well-received benefit that we've managed to extend beyond just those who are physically near an office.
And I think going towards, like you said, going towards the employee themselves, right? And that's sort of the way that you guys sort of made the decision from a hybrid piece, like that gives it sort of that control to the employee, which I think is, they probably own that.
It's why should I define what wellness means to you? Right. It's something that only you can define what actually means to you.
So what are a few things that you, Katie, have learned in the last 2 years as a leader? I mean, there's been so many things that have gone up and down and sideways. What's sort of been some of the things that have kept you with your North Star, and some of the things that you've learned as a person and as a leader?
One of the things I realized is I'm borderline introvert, extrovert. And on the one hand, during the pandemic and working from home, really fed my inner introvert. My extrovert really missed connection. And one of the things that, for example, on the legal team, my team asked me to consider was, instead of doing a weekly or biweekly team meeting, doing shorter but more frequent touch points. And so we've got a 15-minute stand-up 3 times a week. And that, I think, for me at least, has been really beneficial, because it means that we've got a lot of continuous contact with each other.
Right.
And sometimes we don't talk about work at all.
Yeah.
Or oftentimes it's talk about everything else. And then when you're 5 minutes over, then it's like, oh, does anybody have a work thing we need to address?
Yeah.
But that's been so good for us as a team to create that sense of cohesion, even when we haven't had a chance to get everybody together.
Yeah.
And it's meant that we had a new attorney who joined in the summertime. And as we all know, joining a new team, I always feel a little bit trepidatious about, am I going to fit in?
Right.
What's this going to be like?
Yeah.
And especially since the others of us on the legal team have been here at that point for about 4 years or longer.
Yeah.
And I think that some of those team norms that we have around building those continuous connections gave her that opportunity to really, observe us, get to know us through that, and, just see how both normal and crazy we are, and then be able to just slip right in. And now it feels like she's always been a part of a team.
Yeah. How many people are on the legal team?
Right now, there are 4 of us.
4. Okay. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then the executive leadership team. What do you guys meet weekly? I mean, do you guys have calls weekly?
Every other week we'll have a staff meeting, but there are so many touch points between all of us as we are working on different things together, or different subsections doing some work together, or all the one-on-ones. And so that's been a really nice thing. I think one of the great shifts that a lot of my colleagues on the executive team have made, and that we've often shifted away from doing when we were doing one-on-ones, from doing Zoom meetings. And instead we'll each just hop on our phone and go for a walk in our neighborhoods while we're talking. And I think that's been a very healthy shift for all of us, where just getting out and moving a little bit. And it also takes you away from the distraction of Slack popping up, or email, or other things.
Squirrel. It's just constant.
No, it's literally a squirrel that might distract you.
Yeah, which is way better than a tech squirrel. Wow. So you guys, the plan, sort of the workplace plan in the future, or what the plan would be, is sort of hybrid, remote. Employees make their own decisions whether they want to come in or not come in. They can sort of reserve anything. Is that's across the global footprint for you guys?
Yes, it is. Yeah. And we have offices in Belfast, London, Singapore, and Sydney as well. And, just depending on what's been going on locally with the pandemic and regulations, each of the offices has opened up at a different point throughout the last year. And right now, all of our offices are open. Yeah. And just working to comply with local regulations. We're very excited here in Portland to have the mask mandate lifted, and hoping that we'll get some more folks in once that is not a consideration for people.
Right.
But it has been really neat to see the teams respond differently, and just how it really is driving employees to do their best work where it works best for them. Yeah. Because for some, there are times when I so appreciate having a day at home where I can be heads down and really focused. Yeah. And then there are those times I've started coming in, I mentioned to you earlier, 1 day a week, and being able to do a few meetings in person with somebody else who's in town, or just walk into the kitchen area and run into somebody else. Right. I have missed that so much. And so it's been really nice to experience that.
Yeah. So just think about your footprint. So when you were traveling the globe for 8 months, you were scouting out places where Puppet was going to open up offices. That was smart.
I think
it was very forward thinking of you.
I am really pushing for Italy. Yeah. It's not yet on our roadmap though.
Well, manifest it. Okay. It'll happen.
That's right. Visualize.
Yeah. Visualize. So if you had a chance to share, this is going to be an interesting question for you because of all the books you've read.
Oh boy.
If you had a chance to share coffee or cocktail with anybody in history or present or whatever, who might that be and why?
It's a really funny thing you're asking this question, because this was part of our leadership team offsite around Christmas, where we were just doing some social things together. Nice. And my answer,
I got a cue. They told me to ask questions. No.
Well, my answer remains consistent. Queen Latifah.
I would have never, ever guessed that.
I know it may seem a little off the wall since we were just talking about books, etc.
No, this is great.
I don't know a whole lot about her personally, or her personal life. I haven't read a lot about her. What I admire about her is just that the openness she has had to doing so many different things in her career. And, going from music to acting and so many different kinds of music and acting in very different things, TV, movies, and the roles that she's played have always been really interesting to me. And I just think she would be fascinating to have a cocktail with and get to know.
So I think she'd be fun too.
I think so too.
That would be an enjoyable
That's why I would do a cocktail,
experience.
not coffee.
Yeah. I would have never guessed that. That's a great answer.
Well, thank you.
Really great answer. So for those that might want to learn more about you and what's who you are and what's next for you or in Puppet, where do they go? Where can they find you?
Oh gosh. I am very much not active on social media. So it's just finding me, I guess through LinkedIn, I'm active there and, finding me here at Puppet. And it's been fun. I really have enjoyed networking. And what I found is a lot of current or former colleagues who have family members or friends who are considering going to law school and reaching out and like, hey, so-and-so is thinking about doing law school or is just about to graduate and just wants to talk about what the different options are out there. I love those kinds of conversations because I think similar to what Queen Latifah has done with her career, what I have found is the times that I end up doing some of the most exciting stuff is when I haven't planned it.
Yeah.
And I just leave myself open to it.
Right. Yeah. So I'm going to be sending you emails too about book recommendations because that you give those too. Absolutely.
I love to read. It's a true addiction.
So and one last question, I think too. My brother's an attorney, and I've heard you either have to love it or hate it. I guess you clearly love it.
I do. I love.
Or maybe the ability. Yeah. Maybe you love it, but maybe there's the things that it allows you to sort of do, I guess, with that.
I think so. I think what I've appreciated about going to law school and practicing as an attorney is what it's allowed me to explore in my life.
Yeah.
And if you had asked me back when I was an undergraduate majoring in religious studies, I was never going to pick working at a tech company. I wouldn't have even thought that was an option.
Yeah.
And yet it's been an incredible journey for me.
Yeah.
And one of the things I really love about being in-house, and especially with the people I work with here, is that they understand and appreciate that I am a business person who happens to know the law, as opposed to a lawyer who happens to work in business.
Yeah, that's a really great distinction.
Yeah, and
really
I think it's a very important one.
Yeah. Well, Katie, thanks so much for spending your morning with us, walking around, showing us the great space for De La Salle North Catholic also that you guys donated. And just, I learned a lot. I learned that you traveled for 8 months. The Queen Latifah thing is probably the most interesting thing that I've learned in this conversation. But just thanks so much for the time. I just really appreciate you saying yes and joining me on the podcast today.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. This was fun.
Yeah, great.